Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Climate Justice Before the Courts, Ireland, Switzerland, and the Pacific Islands. My name is Clodagh, and I work in Community Law and Mediation Centre for Environmental Justice. Next Tuesday and Wednesday, on January 27th and 28th, the Irish High Court will hear a challenge to Ireland's Climate Action Plan brought by a grandfather, a youth climate activist, and a child represented by their parent. The applicants are joined in this action by Community Law and Mediation, acting as a client for the first time in our 50-year history on behalf of the communities we work with who are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And together we argue that the failure to reduce Ireland's emissions in line with their legally binding requirements under national and EU law is a breach of fundamental rights. This is a public hearing, and we invite you all to come along to the High Court on Tuesday 27th and Wednesday 28th next week. It will run from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and attendants will have to comply with the court service etiquette guidelines, which I'll share in the chat box in a moment. So in today's webinar, we're bringing together litigants and campaigners who have laid the ground for this climate case to be taken in Ireland. We will have time for questions, so if you have a question for either of our speakers, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of our screen. So I'm really pleased to welcome today's speakers. And just before I pass over to our first speaker, Isabel, I'd like to note that we were expected to be joined by Vishal Prasad from the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. You may know that Vishal and their organization are based in Fiji, and at the moment, unfortunately, they're experiencing a significant thunderstorm with intermittent connection to power and electricity. So he was not able to join, but we send them our best wishes that they stay safe, and hopefully we'll connect with them at another time. And just to provide a quick introduction to what they do, the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change were a group of 27 law students who launched the Climate Change Before the ICJ campaign from a small classroom. And after 6 years of incredible campaigning, the International Court of Justice delivered the climate advisory opinion in July of last year. And in this opinion, the world's highest court confirmed that every state must prevent climate harm, cooperate internationally, and protect human rights. And really, in plain terms, the opinion noted that governments can be held to account for inadequate targets, fossil fuel expansion, and failure to regulate private actors. So the opinion is it's the legal backbone that movements and frontline communities have needed to turn promises into enforceable action. So I'm going to share a link to their website into the chat box in a moment for anyone who'd like to learn more about their work. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to pass over to Isabella Jorg. Isabel was directly involved in the landmark Klimaseniorinnen case against the Swiss government, which led to a landmark ruling delivered by the European Court of Human Rights in 2024. It drew international attention to the impact of climate change on fundamental rights, and in the case, the court affirmed that climate change poses a direct and serious threat to human rights and confirmed the obligation of states to take effective action to address it. So I'm delighted to pass over to you, Isabel. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here today, and obviously I hope our Irish friends will have success in court. It's good to have more and more organizations and people fighting for climate change in court, and I'm a strong believer that to the individual's world, it's probably one of the only avenue we have to we still have open, since the political arena is so complicated. Anyhow, thank you for inviting, and I would have been asked to give the audience a brief update on the story of the Klimaseniorinnen, respectively the elderly Swiss ladies, as we call ourselves in English. So, first of all, maybe some might wonder why Switzerland is actually part of this climate change environment, being in a mountainous country with glaciers, with the inbound country. But I can tell you, glaciers are disappearing or are melting heavily in summer. There's not much snow, as I'm experienced currently being in the Alps. And Switzerland is one of the countries in Europe with the fastest rising temperature. So we have on average already 2 degrees higher than 70 years ago. So it's actually, we are we are facing heat waves, especially. So why did the Klimaseniorinnen start with our case against the Swiss government? It was following a precedent case, some of you might know, the agenda case in the Netherlands, which was the first time that the court accepted a case against a state government, claiming that the NGO, the climate activists, claimed that the state has an obligation, as you mentioned, Claudia, to implement adequate protection against climate change. And that is not just on the political arena, but also in court. This was in 2016, and at that time in Switzerland, a group of people, among them some from Greenpeace, an environmental lawyer, and some activists, decided to file a similar case against Switzerland. First, we did quite an extensive research to understand what would be the best outcome for a case, which could be the vulnerable people claiming against the state, and what would be sort of the procedural laws and so on to have maybe some success. And this is also one of the learning, to invest enough time in prepare a case. It's expensive and it's time consuming. And in our case, it came out that vulnerable people, group of people, are primarily young babies, newborns, young kids, or elderly women beyond 75. Since the organism of females are quite different to men, and there is a higher risk of fatality in heat waves, a considerable higher risk for elderly women than elderly men of the same age group. So there's a lot of medical evidence if people want to investigate in that. And so we decided to claim as a group of elderly women 65 plus and only women in order to have a higher success rate in court, to file a claim against the Swiss government. And I'm not going to the different steps, but we claimed in 3 court instances. First, the Swiss Agency of Environmental, and up to the Supreme Court of Switzerland. And in all cases, the case was dismissed on the basis of there is no victim status, climate change affects everybody, Switzerland is a tiny country, the famous drop in the ocean, and we are doing anyhow enough, and go to the political scenery. So our cases were dismissed, and since we are quite stubborn old ladies, we didn't give up and decided to file a claim at the European Court of Human Rights, which is the court, a supranational binding court for the 46 member states of the Council of Europe, dealing with human rights, as it says. In 2020, we filed our case and weren't really expect that it's been accepted, since most of the cases at the European Court human rights get early dismissed on lack of jurisdiction and so on. But our case was accepted, and much to our surprise, it was passed on to the Grand Chamber, where 17 judges sit and decide on important, overall important cases. We understood later on that the court had been expected for some time to rule on environmental issue. And our case came in probably on time and handy. So in 23, there was a public hearing in Strasbourg, which was one of the first times when our organization became quite publicly known, so there was a lot of press coverage. And there were obviously representatives of the Swiss government. Oh, just lost my plugin, sorry. And our lawyers advocating for our case. Our case was right for life, right for well-being, right for access of court, which was not granted, and we filed 4 individual cases of elderly women with specific medical history, claiming that there was a causal relationship between their fragile health condition and heat waves. Plus, we filed on behalf of the association. This is quite important to understand why the court then dismissed the elderly ladies. We had supporting third parties, one of them a well-known lady in Ireland, Mary Robinson. She was supporting our case in her former role as UN Commissioner for Human Rights, and a number of other third parties, international organizations, NGOs, and so on. So in April 24, the court ruled in our favor, mostly in our favor, other than the 4 individual cases that were dismissed. All other points of claiming were accepted. And in addition, something of importance which we didn't understand at the very moment was that the court defined criteria for future claims to be submitted by climate activist groups. And this actually facilitates access to court for climate activists. Yes, that's so. We had a landmark result, a precedent case for the 46 member states that has already been named in a number of follow-up cases in national and international courts. Switzerland, if I may just add, Switzerland was obviously required to implement severe measures against climate change to protect the health not only of our group but of the population, and so far nothing has happened. Switzerland's government and the majority of parliament were very much against the ruling and keep continuing deferring an implementation. It's been back and forth on the Council of Europe, and so far we haven't seen any results in Switzerland, but we have seen a lot of results outside of our country. Yes, I think I'll stop here, if that's fine for you. And that's the brief story of our activities. And maybe just to mention that there were 9 women on the board of the Klimaseniorinnen, and I'm not one of those. They have been working really for 10 years on this case, providing their time, their energy, and we are now 3,000 members, and we still continue to fight, first for the implementation and secondly for a better protection of our environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and for your really courageous and persistent fight in trying to access justice. And I suppose not only has your case laid the ground for other cases to be taken around Europe and further afield, but it also shows us the importance of preparing for a ruling, and particularly if a ruling goes in your favor, and the need to be sure that we're ready for success if it happens, and how we might deal with preparing for reluctance to implement in particular. Isabel is very kindly joining this webinar while she is on holidays with her friends. So she will be leaving us slightly early today. So if anybody has a question for Isabel, please do put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And we can maybe take a couple of questions for Isabel now, if there are any, before passing over to Judy of Friends of the Irish Environment. Could I ask Isabel, have you had a lot of public support from people in Switzerland? So even though the government has been very reluctant to implement the ruling, what has the public response been?
Thank you for this question. Well, we had, and we still have public support, primarily from the Greens and leftist part. We have been heavily criticized from the rightist parties as being non-patriotic, stubborn old bitches, and so on. So we had really very heavy critical press reviews, but we also had obviously a lot of funding from people who who are who were willing and to support us. So it's maybe 40 to 60, but we are certainly not popular in Switzerland.
Okay, okay, that's really interesting. We have a couple of questions coming in here from Romy. Isabel, would you have specific advice for others taking a case? And another person has asked if you went about engaging friends and family to support the case, including those who might not have been very aware of the issue of climate change. So maybe we'll take those two to start.
Um, the first one was whether we had support.
Or advice for
Advice,
anyone
advice.
taking a case.
Well, we had been supported heavily by Greenpeace, actually, both in funding, because I can tell you this case was very costly, legal fees obviously,
Mhm.
and we had a huge support by the lawyer who was the lead lawyer and a specialist in environmental regulation. And she unfortunately passed away just before the ruling in Strasbourg, but she bequested us with a considerable sum of money, and she partly worked for free. So there was really a lot of support by people um, realizing that we have a climate issue worldwide and in Switzerland.
Amazing. And then, as part of the case, did you go about engaging friends and family to drum up support for the case, including those who might not have been aware of the issue?
Well, not really. What I mean, obviously, our friends, most of our friends were behind us, but some of our friends couldn't understand why we were filing just for old women. Many thought we were being egoistical. We should file for everybody and not just for us. But this was clearly a procedural topic and not a not a discrimination issue, or that it shouldn't have been understood as a discrimination. So certainly the family and friends of our board members provided a lot of support, but primarily psychological support. But
Absolutely.
it was primarily public, the Greenpeace, the Green Party, some political activists, feminist groups, environmental groups. So we got support more from the civil societies than from our friends.
Great. And that really shows the importance of connecting with the movement and having that behind your case. In terms of the next steps, now that you have this really powerful ruling, there's a question from Frederique. Are you planning to address the ongoing investments into fossil fuels by Swiss public and private financial institutions? That's one question. It's a big question. And then the second one, has there been any further work detailing what implementation should look like? So changes in policies, just transition measures. Have there been any discussions around that?
Yeah, taking the last question first. Yes, we are obviously working more behind the scenes now to make the Swiss government implement the rulings, and we have expert advice. We have a lot of scientists from the Swiss universities that scientists, experts in environmental topics, and we are trying really just behind the scenes and probably also trying to make some of the members of parliament understand the importance to implement adequate protection. So yes, we do a lot, but it's primarily behind the scenes because this is an issue between the Council of Europe now and the Swiss government. And what we are trying is to provide um, um, expert advice, really.
Okay, that's
Yes.
fascinating. And
The second question, we were actually um, debating whether to go after the financial institutions, and the question, the addressee is clearly aware that Switzerland is one of the uh, leading financial um, focus countries. We have a lot of institutions here that still, unfortunately, invest into fossil fuels. And at this moment in time, you have also to understand our board is primarily between 70 plus and 80. So our strength is limited. And at some point, there was a debate whether to go after financial institutions in a next campaigning or to focus on implementation. And the majority considered that implementation and pressuring the Swiss government is what we should be doing at this moment in time, and probably leave the financial institutions to younger generations.
makes complete sense. We have a follow-up question on that point. If you could explain what's happening at the Council of Europe level and that non-implementation of the ruling is going back and forth between the Swiss government and the Council. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, we understood that the Swiss government was heavily lobbying behind the scenes that the Council of Europe would just let it pass. So, as in any other cases where the Court of Human Rights, unfortunately, has no sanction methodology, the only sanction is sort of reputational risk. And this continual review by the Council of Europe. And so far, this is now, I think, the third time that the process has been going back and forth. And so far, the Council of Europe has not given in to the Swiss government's pressure as yet. So it's still hanging sort of in the clouds, and we don't know what would be the outcome. We are clearly concerned that these international rule of laws are being deteriorated, as we are seeing in other areas, and that we feel concerned and ashamed that Switzerland forms part of those countries by now.
Okay, thank you so much for that really detailed explanation, Isabel. A question from Jean Moore. Are there any surveys or polling in Switzerland to show how much the public supports the ruling that might help its implementation? And do you feel that the case has helped bridge generations older and younger rather than divide them? So has it kind of built support between generations?
I'm not aware of any public information or rating on the support or non-support. At the time of the ruling in 2 years ago, as I said, I think it was quite divided, and I would say that maybe 40% supportive and 60 against. And in the 60, there are a lot of people who just don't care, I would say.
Okay.
So the 40 care and the others sort of. Um, yes, there is obviously a coordination with younger generations. We have also in Strasbourg been supported by young activists from Fridays for Future and others. And as we are seeing with the Pacific Island students, there is clearly there are young generations, very young generations that have understood the importance of climate change and fighting against it. We are not on a daily basis working with younger activist groups, but um, we offer support, we offer advice, we offer co cooperation if need be. But currently we are only focused, I think, on the implementation of the ruling.
Super. Thanks so much, Isabel. And we have a number of questions and comments in the chat box here. I'm very conscious of Judy's time as well, and thanks so much for waiting to present, Judy. But maybe just one final question, Isabel, before you go. Do you think that there are ways that academics and students can support strategic litigation?
Um, I understand that our case, the ruling has been or is being widely debated in law schools environment, and especially this criteria for filing new claims by a climate activist group was a positive surprise to most of the law schools, and obviously we would hope that young students, law students, take up learnings from our case and continue our fight at some moment in time. But at least in Switzerland's university law schools department, it's being widely debated as a
Thank you
precedent
so
case.
much. Thank you so much, Isabel, not only for your time this morning, particularly when you're on holidays,
It's okay.
but for all of your really, really amazing work. And it has laid the ground for us to be able to bring a similar case in Ireland. So we're really, really grateful for your courage in bringing the case and for continuing to advocate for the implementation of your ruling. And we're with you all the way. And we'll
Thank
be
you very much. Yeah, I will
absolutely
pass on your praise to my colleagues who really deserve it. And
thank
I will
you.
stay a couple of minutes to listen to the
Great.
Irish
Thank
case.
you.
I'm really interested in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel. That's wonderful. And thank you very much, Judy, for giving Isabel time to answer some questions before handing over to Judy. So, Judy is Director of Friends of the Irish Environment, a network of volunteers who work to, among many other things, monitor the full implementation of and assist in the development of European law. And Friends of the Irish Environment also provide assistance to individuals, local groups, and the wider public in understanding environmental issues. So, Friends of the Irish Environment are currently taking a case challenging the Irish Government's Climate Action Plan 2023, which is a key pillar of Ireland's climate policy, for failure to comply with the legally binding carbon budgets to 2030. The case is currently awaiting judgment from the Court of Appeal, and it's extremely timely given that we heard from the Minister for Climate, Darragh O'Brien, last week that our successive climate action plans have failed to set out a sufficiently clear roadmap for effective climate action in line with Ireland's legal obligations. The financial consequences of this failure are a potential 28 billion euro in fines, but the human cost, of course, is already being felt. So, Judy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting us. I appreciate that. Yeah, so actually, I was originally invited to talk about why we consider that the law is an important tool in our search for climate change. But if I can go back to the beginning, I'm not sure how many of your people online here know too much about us, but initially the group was established by just a small group of people in 1997, shortly after the Habitats directives were brought into play. And it was seen that this might be a way of trying to protect a lot of the environment in Ireland, which was under sudden onslaught, really, with the economic development of the country. And so things were beginning to move and a lot of damage was being done. Initially, it wasn't using the law, it was using our connections within Europe. And it just so happened that it was an Irish guy who was in charge of the department in the EU. So we had a direct connection. You could phone him up and talk to him, talk about what Europe could be doing to enforce their rules, etc. And it only gradually emerged that the law was used more and more. Why is it an essential tool? Well, when I was first asked, I mean, my initial reaction is it's the only game in town. I mean, there is no other way of making things happen. And even that, as Isabel has described, it doesn't always actually make anything happen. You can keep winning cases, and yet still the situation gets worse and worse and worse. But anyway, it was really after huge public awareness around the Climate Act going back to 2021, very much with your support, Clodagh, who helped to raise public awareness. It was quite phenomenal. People who were around then will remember it very clearly. And it was following on from that that we have the various climate action plans, which are intended to actually say, well, what are we actually going to do about this? And then, of course, you come round to the law. The law, Friends of the Irish Environment have had a very important role in developing law, and a lot of that is around definitions. So, as you know yourself, regarding the climate action plans, the whole, what does it actually mean to ensure that we have a working plan? What does it actually mean to be consistent? And these are questions that have not finally been resolved as yet. And there's some of the issues that we're still waiting to hear from the various appeals that have been made. And of course, with climate law and mediation running that case for Friends of the Irish Environment, they're very much dealing with these issues, and the legal, remarkably efficient legal team teasing out these definitions in the hope that we can find something that actually works, that actually sticks. I mean, I don't know where to go with this. I mean, we do a lot more than climate. And clearly, I mean, to be honest, when we started, climate wasn't a story. I mean, 97, I mean, obviously climate was a problem, but it wasn't a story. It really wasn't on our agenda at all. And that has crept up to become more and more significant. But there's quite a lot of other ways to try and ensure that it's all very well. We have some pretty good policies in Ireland, in actual fact. You know, you go back to the policy document and you just read it as a casual reader and you think, well, that's sort of sorted. We know what we're doing. We know what we're trying to achieve. But when it actually comes to it, it doesn't actually stick. and there are so many ways to get round the law that it's a constant iterative battle, if you like, to move one step after the other. And as you know, there are now, following on from the Climate Action Plan 23, there are now more, as you said in the beginning, there's a new case coming up that you're running at the end of the month. So all these things hopefully will push the agenda along, because it's very, very worrying. As Isabel has said, it's not being implemented. Politics doesn't seem to be working. In fact, it's going in the wrong direction. And what other tools do we have? I don't know whether any of your listeners will have some ideas for us on other angles that we could tackle. There's still a lot of problem in environmental, biodiversity and climate run very much hand in hand, and there's huge damage done from a lack of understanding, dealing with cases where local councils don't always have the skills and experience to recognise when there is actually a problem, when dunes are being destroyed, where the right questions aren't being asked, where environmental reports justify action because there's nobody around to actually challenge those reports, which are not always the best. And that's why so much ends up in court. And of course now, it's very much a question now, a further attack that the government are actually trying to stop us accessing the courts. Is that because we've been very effective or what? I'm not quite sure. We don't feel as if we have been sufficiently effective, but there's work going on at the moment to make it extremely difficult for groups like ours to access legal systems, to get into court. There doesn't seem to be any understanding that the problems don't really start with the courts. They actually start with very poor decisions, and decisions that aren't made correctly, and a level of incompetence in how decisions are made, that this is our only opportunity to correct some of the mistakes that are being made. So we'll have to wait and see where that leads us. Not quite sure. So, I don't know whether that leaves people with questions to ask. Maybe we should see what comes up. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. That's really wonderful. We do have a question for you here from Aideen. Does the statement by the Minister last week strengthen the case for Friends of the Irish Environment? That was the, I suppose, admission that under Ireland's current plans and policies, we are not on track to meet our 2030 targets. And assuming that the case goes in favour of Friends of the Irish Environment, what does that mean for the Irish government? What will they have to do as a consequence?
Well, what we want the Irish government to do is to actually rewrite the plan to make it actually functional, to make it actually work. And they need a lot of help and advice to do that. But this is one of the things that we're looking for, and that you're looking for us for, is to actually, for the court to actually give recommendations to the government about what they need to do. And one aspect of that is to do with public access to the plans. Like there's been a suggestion that there was never a draft climate action plan for us to actually say, well, actually, we think you've missed a good point there, and you've forgotten this, and this isn't going to work out the way you think. So this is very much what we're looking for. And does the government statement help us? Well, not particularly. The government do not seem concerned about the fines. They seem to be very confident that Europe won't push the fines, in the same way that Isabel was talking about Europe finding it very difficult to actually make anything happen. They can make recommendations, but it doesn't seem to have any force of enforcement. And it's it's the implementation and enforcement, which is a huge issue in Ireland. And a lot of the work that Friends of the Irish Environment are doing is trying to actually enforce rules that already exist but are just not being applied. So I don't know if that answers the
Absolutely.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And actually, just on that point, I'm going to come back to an earlier question that was asked by John Sweeney. And Isabel, feel free to jump in on this as well, because it's about, I suppose, reluctance to implement successful judgments. Is there any legal instrument to get judgments enforced within a certain period, as happened, I believe, in the Netherlands? If either of you have thoughts on that.
I'd have to leave that to the legal teams. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yes, I don't think I can contribute a lot. I understand the Netherlands, they did take up the court issue and implement some measures, but that was 10 years ago when environment was still quite a popular topic, so to speak. And nowadays it has been off the sort of list of focus, public focus. Um, yes, we certainly have a problem generally with enforcement, and I think this is um, maybe this International Court of Justice by the Pacific Island students, where there was in their ruling, as far as I understood, the ruling said that countries are being responsible and can be held accountable with fines and with compensation. So I think probably at some point there has to be a change in the international laws to enforce compensation, huge compensations against governments. So it's only money, I think, that can drive the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. Um, a question for Judy in relation to if the current changes to planning law for infrastructure are the legal difficulty that you're referring to, and your thoughts on the government's proposal to alter access to judicial review for environmental and planning challenges, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, that was what I was referring to at the end of when I was speaking there, the new cost rules. What a lot of people don't understand is that even if Ireland, they claim that they're following the English pattern where costs are restricted and 35,000 euros is a sort of a round sort of figure that's being talked about in Europe. Yes, it does seem that that our costs are very high, but it's a very different system in Europe. When an environmental case is brought to court, there is a panel of judges and experts that actually look at the questions involved, look at the law that's being invoked, look at the obstacles. A huge number of experts dealing with the problem on behalf of the court, and then the results of that research are taken for the judge's decision. So in Ireland, that work has actually been privatized. So now, who does that work? It's not done by the government or by a panel. It's done by private lawyers on behalf of private clients. So all those costs, which are still there, the same costs exist for the time of the judges on the panel, for the time and experience of the experts. The costs are still there. But in Europe, they're borne by the state. And in Ireland, they have been borne by the public. So in actual fact, the system of recompensing people taking cases if they win, and they're right that the law has been misapplied, that is covered by a section which means our costs are paid. That is actually quite an efficient way of working, because the private industry is quite good at providing the necessary work. Your legal teams that are working on the climate cases, they're very smart people. They're doing a really good job of pulling out the definitions in the law to make it absolutely clear what are we promising to do. And that isn't going to be paid for in the future. So how is that work going to be done? It's very worrying, and it's totally misunderstood. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. That's a great answer to a very complex issue. And Emma, as you point out in your question, not a fan of commentary or rhetoric that frames environmental defenders or local communities as a barrier to housing. And I suppose as an organisation that works within the area of housing as well as environmental justice, we're really concerned about the proposal to cost legal caps as well. I suppose from our perspective, restricting access to justice in that way won't improve the quality of environmental decision making, as Judy has pointed out. It just reduces the likelihood that legal errors will actually be identified and corrected. So our perspective would be that we would recommend that the quality of decision making could be improved by addressing institutional capacity and making sure that public bodies at all levels of government have the resources that they need to make decisions, rather than restricting access to the courts, which we're not sure how that would be compliant with the Aarhus Convention, which requires that access to justice be fair, equitable, and not prohibitively expensive. So it's definitely really worrying. There is another question here about the understanding of the climate action plan across other policies, or maybe in relation to other policies. For example, industrial strategy. Is this clear enough yet? Judy, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Is there a sort of precedence given yet to the Climate Action Plan and Ireland's climate policies and the Act itself even?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? You know, I believe that we need big changes in corporate law, as well as the work being done on climate action, because until corporations are obliged to actually pay more attention to downstream impact, to actually make climate policy stick at an industrial level with strategies. I mean, the whole National Development Plan, which is still focused very heavily on roads, is clearly going to aggravate, the climate emissions, and various different plans that are currently on the books are not going to do anything to help the situation. It's hard to see. Even currently, I'm actually a planner and work mainly in Wicklow, and we're being asked to find more land to take more housing in Wicklow. But the only place you can earn enough money to pay for a modern mortgage is in Dublin. So everybody that will be buying into living in Wicklow will be on the road to Dublin. And the congestion alone, let alone the air pollution and the carbon emissions, is crucifying. And I would say we're reaching a tipping point where there be a really strong reaction. It's becoming so serious. It's not working. And if they paid more attention to climate change, then a lot of other things would have fallen into place. One thing follows on from another. Yeah. There is such a thing as right action, and in correcting climate change, you're going to be correcting a lot of other issues at the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely, Judy. And just on that point as well of where the climate action plans take, whether they might take precedence against other policies and objectives of government, we're currently working to develop community resources and resources for organizations that will look at this question of public sector duties in relation to climate change. So keep an eye out for those.
Yeah. And of course, you need to mention Cool Glass, which is going to determine what are the duties of local authorities around these subjects. This is really, really important, and we're all waiting with bated breath to pray that we get something good come out of it. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So that's a case that's before the Supreme Court, and we're hoping that judgment might be handed down later this month. A question here from Georgina. For both of you, in your experience, how can strategic litigation taken at the national and international levels strengthen and be strengthened by more local action? Isabella, would you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's the old adage, think globally, act locally. And that still is relevant and still works. You can't do much locally unless we correct it at the top, but it does need to come everywhere. We all need to be cognizant of what our actions actually involve. And I mean, you can't live, there's only so much we can do as individuals. One of the main things I think we can do as individuals is those of us who have done a bit of reading or have understood some of these issues, we need to talk about it to our friends and neighbours, because that's how most knowledge is transferred between friends, and not to be shy of talking about these issues locally. So yeah, it needs to come at both angles.
Thank you, Judy. And Isabel, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Think locally and go then internationally. But I think the huge contributors of climate change are some of the industries, fossil fuels and so on. So we can do in our private life as much as we want to reduce our carbon footprint, but it has sadly not a real impact on the overall increase of carbon and whatever methods and so on. So I think we should go really also after corporations, and as Judy said, the corporation law should be changed. Investment into fossil fuels should be banished, sort of sanctioned, but at this point in time, I don't have really much hope that this will happen, because pressure groups are just too strong. But I really think we should not feel personally only responsible for the state of the world, but we have to take accountability of those who actually do the work things.
Thank you, Isabella. Very well said. And as a final question to you both, looking ahead to 2026, what is giving you hope, or what's sustaining you to keep going in the work that you're doing?
Well, sustaining hope is really that there are young generations who continue in our footsteps. And I think as long as human livings, there is hope. But personally, at the political level, at this moment in time, I have no hope at all. But I have hope for some engaging communities.
Yeah, very, very difficult to find hope. Except things can turn on a pin, and the joker's thrown into the pack. We've already had a few of them, and there could be more. I can't imagine what. It's very worrying. Really, in a way, it's if your temperament allows you to continue, that's the best we can hope for. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And I suppose what gives me hope is listening to you both and the incredible work that you're doing and have been doing for many years and continuing to do. To everyone in the chat and everyone in the audience who has joined us today, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. Thank you to our speakers for your expertise, your insights. We really appreciate you all joining us and contributing to the discussion. We hope you found the session informative and valuable, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And we do hope that some of you might be able to join us at the High Court next week. It's a really important case. And I am conscious that I meant to share in the chat box information about the Pacific Island students fighting climate change. For some reason, we don't have a chat box in this webinar. So instead, I'm going to send that information via email afterwards, as well as information on how you can join us at the High Court next week. So thank you so much. Thank you again to our speakers and to everyone in the audience and for the brilliant questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.